Hello! Today we're going to be looking at comma sense. And this is a presentation to help you make sense of commas. So let's jump right in. What is a comma? I'm sure we've all asked ourselves that question. What does a comma do? What is its function? How to use it correctly? Does a comma really go here? I'm not sure. This will not touch on everything because there are so many comma rules, but it will get you started. So simply put, a comma is a noun and it's a punctuation mark used especially as a mark of separation within the sentence. Now, definitions are great, right? They clear everything up usually. They let you know exactly what something is, what it's meant to do. But in this case, does the definition clear everything up? Probably not. So let's just dig a little bit deeper into the subject of commas. So just looking at some of the main ideas for a comma here, think of a comma as an indication for a reader to pause and take a breath. A comma usually does signify a pause within a sentence, and it usually follows natural speech patterns. And a comma means that a reader can pause and take in an idea more vividly. So now that we have a little bit of background information on kind of what a comma does within a sentence, creates a pause, let's dig a little bit deeper into ways that we use a comma and some of the rules of commas. So our first thing that we're going to look at is commas separate three or more items in a list. So commas separate a series of words, a series of phrases, or a series of clauses. And just so we are clear, a series has to be three or more things. It can be three or more, meaning it could be 10. It might be a little bit long, but it can be 10, but it can't be 2. So if you have 2 things, you would not separate it by a comma, but if you have 3 or more, you will separate by commas. So we have some examples here. I like to eat sushi, steak, and pasta. So we have our 3 things. So what do? So that it doesn't look like I like to eat sushi, steak, pasta, which would be one thing. We have to create that clear break of it being 3 things. So we have sushi, comma, steak, comma, and pasta. In our second example, we have my daughter likes to sing, play soccer, and go shopping. So listen for that break. My daughter likes to sing, play soccer, and go shopping. So we hear those pauses. So she likes to sing, comma, play soccer, comma, and go shopping. And for our third example, we have my son gets up in the morning, goes to school, and rushes home to play Fortnite. That is a true story, guys. Every day, rushes home to play Fortnite. So we have our 3 items in the series. He gets up in the morning, comma, he goes to school, comma, and rushes home to play Fortnite. So commas are also used to separate 2 independent clauses that are joined by a coordinating conjunction. So to help you just identify a coordinating conjunction a little bit more quickly, think of the acronym FANBOYS, and that stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. And of course there are more coordinating conjunctions, but these are typically the most commonly used coordinating conjunctions. So let's look at some sentences with coordinating conjunctions that are combining 2 independent clauses. They went paddleboarding and they saw a sea turtle. And that actually happened to us while we were paddleboarding. So they went paddleboarding, comma, and they saw a sea turtle. So they went paddleboarding. That is an independent clause. It can stand alone. You could put a period after that and be done. You have your subject they, you have your verb went. They saw a sea turtle. Again, independent clause. You have your subject they, you have your verb saw, and so you have a complete sentence. So when you're combining those two complete sentences and make for more fluidity, you're going to add that comma and that coordinating conjunction. So in our second example, Jay is hungry, but she forgot her lunch, which is like a daily thing for me. So Jay is hungry. You have your subject, Jay, and your verb is. On your second part of the sentence, she forgot her lunch. You have your subject, she, and your verb forgot. So you have two independent clauses that you can identify. So how do you link those? You've got to add that comma after hungry and add that coordinating conjunction, but. And on our last example, are you going to the beach or are you going somewhere else on vacation? So again, two dependent clauses. So after your first dependent clause, you're going to add that comma and that coordinating conjunction, or. So another thing that commas do, they are used to set off an introductory phrase or clause so that readers know that the introduction is over and the main part of the sentence is following. And that introductory phrase is going to be a dependent clause. It will not be able to stand alone. So let's look at what some sentences with introductory phrases and clauses look like. So we have our first sentence. When she's having a bad day, she doesn't feel like talking. So when she's having a bad day, that's not going to stand alone. That's going to be your introductory phrase. But she doesn't feel like talking, that's a dependent clause. It can stand alone. So you're going to put that comma. You do not need the coordinating conjunction, just the comma, between the main part of the sentence, which is she doesn't feel like talking, the independent clause, and the when she's having a bad day, that's a dependent clause that's kind of explaining, hey, this is why she doesn't feel like talking. So in our second example, we have after the soccer game, the team celebrated being area champs, which my daughter was celebrating the other day. So after the soccer game, the team celebrated being area champs. The team celebrated being area champs. That's a sentence all along, so it's just saying what the team did after the soccer game. So it's explaining that. That introductory phrase is explaining what the team did after the game, or after being area champs. And for our third example, although the Weather Channel predicted rain, it's sunny outside. So we have our introductory phrase that cannot stand alone, that dependent clause, followed by the independent clause, it's sunny outside, and so we link the two with that comma. I hope this is making a little more sense. Commas are also used in dates and addresses, and this seems simple enough, but it's just usually common mistakes that people make with these. So let's look at some examples of what they look like together. First, let's start with some rules for dates. Specific days of the week are followed by a comma if a specific date follows. And also, if a date refers to a specific year, the year is set off by a comma. So let's look at these dates. Our first example, I was born on December 25th, 1986. So if it was just December 25th, I was born on December 25th, you'd put a period. But since it's followed by a specific year, then you are going to put a comma after, the day and the year. before the year. And then also we have a day of the week followed by a specific date. So we have a meeting scheduled for Friday, April 18th, 2025. So you're going to put that comma before, after the day of the week, and before the month, and then also after the 18th and before the year, because we're talking about a specific day and time. So looking at a few comma rules for addresses, you're going to use a comma to separate elements of an address, such as the city, the street, the city, and the state, but you're not going to use a comma to separate the zip code from the state. So you do not put that comma between the state and the zip code that follows. So let's look at these examples. We have the concert will be held at 270 Jackson Avenue, and that's your street, Birmingham, your city, Alabama, 35023. So you have your street, comma, your city, comma. You have your state and your zip, but you do not put a comma between those. So on our second example, we have, can we go to Walmart at 2354 US Highway 280, Sylacauga, Alabama, 35150. So 2354 Highway 280 is your street, so that's going to be a comma before you hit the city, Sylacauga. Then you're going to put a comma between that city and that state, but again, no comma between the state and the zip code. So let's look at this with a comma. Please send the letter to 35 West Street, Childersburg, Alabama, 35844. So you would put the comma between the street and the city. You would put the comma between the city and the state. But here's where it's wrong. You would not put that comma between the state and the zip code. And that's a common misconception. So commas are also used to set off non-essential clauses within a sentence. So let's examine some sentences with non-restrictive clauses. So our first example is Mia, who made several great assists in last night's soccer game, scored the game-winning goal. So looking at it, if we just had Mia scored the game-winning goal, we would have our subject, Mia, and our verb, scored. So that would be a complete sentence. So here we have a non-restrictive clause. Who made several great assists in last night's soccer game. That's just additional information. It could be left out. It wouldn't really be needed. So what are you going to do? You're going to set those off with commas to show that, hey, we're just adding some information here, but it's not essential to the sentence. So on our second example, we have Andre, whose action figure collection you would appreciate, is looking for a rare Macho Man figure to add to his impressive collection. And so if we just had Andre is looking for a rare Macho Man figure to add to his impressive collection, you would have a complete sentence. You would have your subject, Andre, and your verb, or verb phrase is looking. So that would be a complete sentence, but you have this added information, whose action figure collection you would appreciate. That's just added information that the author wants you to know or thinks you would appreciate or value. It's adding a little something to the sentence, so you set that off, that non-restrictive clause off with commas. And on our last, we have Maverick, whom you may know is a great friend to everyone. So again, we have that non-restrictive clause, whom you may know. So that's going to be set off in commas as well. So moving on, you also use commas to set off appositive phrases in sentences. So let's look at what some appositive phrases look like in sentences. And again, these are non-essential to the sentence, but it does rename a nearby noun. So it gives some clarification, but it's not really necessary information. My son, Maverick, wants to be a YouTuber when he grows up. So in this specific situation, Maverick is renaming my son. It's telling more about who he is. So my son Maverick wants to be a YouTuber when he grows up. Since that appositive phrase, Maverick, is there, it's renaming my son. That is set off in a series of commas. On our second example, Mia, a talented singer, is teaching herself to play the piano. So here we have Mia, but it's renaming or telling more about Mia, a talented singer. So this is really an appositive phrase. We wouldn't really have to have it if we took it out. It would still work. Mia is teaching herself to play piano. That would be a perfectly fine sentence on its own, but we're adding that information in, so we use those commas. And on our third example, that star, the brightest one in the sky tonight, reminds me of you. So again, we could say that star reminds me of you, and that would be a perfectly fine sentence, but the brightest one in the sky tonight, that adds that little bit of, tells a little bit more about the star, adds a little extra to the sentence, makes it a little stronger, but we set that off with commas. So you're also going to use a comma to indicate a direct address. And sometimes this is a little confusing to people. What is a direct address? It is when the speaker of a sentence addresses someone directly by name or title, and so this is called a direct address. One or more commas are needed to show that a direct address is being made in a sentence, and that really just depends on the placement of where the direct address appears in the sentence. So looking at some examples of those, we have, "Let's eat, Grandma." And I have actually seen this example used a lot of times without that comma before Grandma. It would be, "Let's eat, Grandma. Let's eat, Grandma." Well, we don't want to eat Grandma, so we got to put that comma in there to show that we are actually addressing Grandma. We're speaking to Grandma. Let's eat, Grandma. So now let's do it with Grandma at the beginning of the sentence. Grandma, comma, let's eat. So Grandma, let's eat dinner. And then our last one, we're using Grandma in the middle of the sentence, so you'll actually use two commas to set it off. "I think, Grandma, that it's time to eat." So you're addressing Grandma, but it's right there in the middle of the sentence, so you have a comma before Grandma and a comma after Grandma. So it wholly depends on where the person's name appears that you are addressing in the sentence of how many commas you use. If it's at the end, you're going to probably use one. If it's at the beginning, you're going to use one. If it's in the middle, you're going to set it off on both sides. So there are many reasons to use commas in sentences, guys. These are not the only rules out there. However, I do hope that this helps you with making sense of commas or comma sense. So if you want any more information, you want to look up what I have shown you today, here are some works cited that I used for this specific presentation. Feel free to look those over and gain more knowledge as you wish. And thank you for watching. Have a great day.